Before Whitney Houston's passing, she hinted at a world the industry never wanted exposed, a world of whispered confessions, midnight breakdowns, and backstage secrets too explosive for the public eye. Behind the glamour of R&B royalty were stories of desire, power, betrayal, and heartbreak that circulated only in hushed tones. These weren't fairy tales or harmless rumors. They were the whispered vault stories of an industry where love, lust, and ambition collided behind locked hotel doors and dimly lit tour buses. Whitney didn't name names, but she understood the price these women paid when passion mixed with fame. Tonight, we open that vault, not to accuse, but to reveal the raw, complicated truth behind 15 R&B divas whose private lives became legends of their own. Get ready. The secrets are heavier than the spotlight. 1. Diana Ross. Diana Ross is often remembered as the woman who conquered fame with pure talent, grace, and golden-voiced magic. But behind Motown's closed doors, in whispered conversations that never reached a microphone, an entirely different portrait circulated. A portrait of a woman whose rise, between 1972 and 1979, wasn't just fueled by brilliance, but by strategy, leverage, and access to power most singers could never dream of touching. During that era, Diana wasn't merely a star, she was a phenomenon, stunning, driven, and sharper than anyone dared admit. And in Hollywood, a woman that luminous naturally drew the gaze of men whose influence stretched far beyond music. While fans imagined harmless flirtations with dancers or producers, insiders spoke of something far more explosive. Diana's rumored partners weren't entertainers at all. They were men who shaped political landscapes and controlled media narratives. Two well-known California politicians, both married, both rising toward national relevance, were said to meet her privately after fundraisers and award ceremonies. One allegedly saw her repeatedly in the same Beverly Hills hotel suite she slipped into after the 1977 Emmy Awards after party. The whispers weren't about romance, but about access. Then there was the third man, the one whose name stayed unspoken except behind locked dressing room doors. A media mogul whose power determined who appeared on television, who received prime interviews, and who graced magazine covers. According to long-standing industry rumors, he arranged specials, interviews, and high-profile features for Diana, favors that seemed to appear right after private, discreet encounters. This wasn't viewed as simple affection. It was the quiet exchange of influence that Hollywood has always pretended not to see. Whitney first heard these stories during Motown 25 rehearsals, when an older director, drunk, bitter, and tired of staying silent, muttered to a room of stunned singers, "Diana didn't just climb the ladder. She climbed the people who built the ladder." The room froze, not in shock but in recognition. Because every insider knew one thing, Diana Ross didn't just navigate power, she aligned herself with the men who controlled it. 2. Patti LaBelle. They whispered about Chaka in dim hotel bars and cramped tour buses, trading stories like forbidden secrets. They described her gliding into songwriting rooms in a silk robe, hair loose, voice low, and unwavering. She would pour whiskey into the men's glasses, look each one in the eye, and demand that they fix her songs. No pleading, no performing softness. To the men, it felt shocking, even improper. To Chaka, it was simply business, the only way to protect her sound in an industry that wasn't built for women who refused to shrink. Whitney, standing at the edge of those circles, learned quickly, in R&B, a woman didn't just sing for her identity, she fought for it. Sometimes the studio was a battlefield, sometimes the bedroom was, but Patti LaBelle's story unfolded in a completely different light. The men who fed her, the men who dressed her. Her truth wasn't loud or cunning, it was tender, aching, shaped by loneliness rather than strategy. Patti wasn't chasing power, validation, or favors. She was craving warmth in a world that devoured every second of her energy. Years of touring had left her drifting from city to city, living in hotel rooms that smelled like stale carpet, waking up to applause that dissolved too quickly. And in that emptiness, she reached for the people who stood closest to her. From 1986 to 1988, that person was Jerome Fields, her private tour chef from New Orleans, a quiet man with steady hands who cooked gumbo exactly the way she liked it. Crew members noticed he often brought trays to her suite after midnight, staying inside longer than any dinner delivery required. Then came Omar Lewis, her stylist during the 1989 European tour. Flashy on stage, gentle in private. Rumors bloomed after hotel cleaners spotted men's clothes in Patty's room, clothes that belonged to neither her husband nor anyone in the band. But Patty never hid behind glamour or manipulation. She didn't seduce for advancement. She simply opened her heart to the ones who understood her exhaustion. The surprise wasn't the romantic entanglements. It was that she never cared whether these men held power. Whitney heard the truth directly backstage at Soul Train in 1990 when Patty, tired and laughing, told her, "Baby, when you set her out here all year long, sometimes the ones who love you best are the ones making your food and fixing your clothes." Whitney never forgot it, because even legends crave warmth. 3. Chaka Khan. Chaka Khan never pretended to be pure. She was ablaze dressed in velvet, a storm of sensuality and talent, whose voice could silence chaos and whose appetite for life burned hotter than the spotlight ever could. But behind the wild, dazzling image lived a harder truth. Perfection often came at a price Chaka paid with her own body. From 1977 to 1982, Rufus was fading, loved, respected, but struggling. The band needed hits, powerful ones, to stay alive on the charts, and in studios from Chicago to Los Angeles, writers murmured that Chaka gave everything she had to secure the songs she knew she deserved. Sometimes everything didn't involve money at all. The names that circulated most often were Don Myrick, the saxophonist, with the smoky tone that defined Chicago soul, and Louis Price, the former Temptations vocalist whose velvet baritone came packaged with dangerous charisma. These men were gifted and fully aware of what Chaka wanted: new arrangements, rewritten hooks, entire bridges rebuilt so her voice could soar, and what they wanted in return wasn't songwriting credit. It was her. One writer, his name intentionally buried by insiders, was said to have spent 2 locked-in nights with Chaka during a 1979 Los Angeles session. He later walked out with a reworked chorus that eventually grew into a modest hit. None of this was coercion. It was survival. Chaka demanded songs aligned with her soul, but the industry rarely honored black women asking for control, so she bartered with the only currency male writers refused to ignore. Whitney knew because she crossed paths with Chaka on tour. Musicians gossip, and backup musicians gossip even louder. 4. Aretha Franklin. To truly grasp the shadowed corners of Aretha Franklin's life, you have to picture Detroit in the mid-1970s, a city torn clean down the middle, one side steeped in church purity, hymns, Bibles, and Sunday dignity, the other pulsing with nightlife, temptation, and the raw hunger of soul music. And right at the center of that collision stood Aretha, the Queen of Soul, born into holiness, crowned by the world, yet pursued by storms no gospel melody could silence. People like to imagine Aretha's secrets unfolded in cheap motels or backstage hideaways, but that was a myth. The truth lived behind the heavy curtains of her mansion on LaSalle Boulevard, where her real life unfolded in silence, far from cameras, fans, and reporters. Between 1974 and 1978, neighbors whispered that cars with clergy plates often rolled up long after midnight. Not junior ministers, not choir directors, full pastors, respected married men with congregations who hung on their every Sunday word, slipping into Aretha's house while the rest of Detroit slept. 3 names rose above the rest: Reverend James Holbrook, married with 2 children; Reverend Milton Gray, famous for sermons that shook church rafters, and Reverend Darrell Henson, the youngest, boldest, and least afraid to take risks. They didn't come seeking advice or prayer. They came because Aretha was powerful, magnetic, wounded, and intoxicating in ways no pulpit could provide. She offered something rare, a place where they could step out of their own holiness and breathe. What stunned people wasn't that these men were preachers, it was that they walked straight into her home, no aliases, no shady motels, no attempt to hide from their congregations or their God. Whitney Houston learned this through Sissy Houston, whose gospel circles overlapped with the same pastors, the same choirs, the same quiet late-night conversations whispered while robes were being folded. Whitney listened enough to know these weren't invented stories. She grew up surrounded by women who shared the truth no documentary would ever dare reveal. The world saw Aretha as Sunday morning salvation. Whitney knew about her Friday nights, a private struggle carried by a woman who could rescue every soul except her own. 5. Toni Braxton. Toni Braxton, the men beyond the spotlight. Most people assumed Toni only entertained men who matched her elegance, producers dripping in influence, R&B singers with chart power, executives who lived in private jets, but the truth that floated through Beverly Hills studios in the late 90s was far stranger. Toni wasn't chasing Hollywood royalty at all. She was drawn to men far outside the industry, men whose lives stood in complete contrast to red carpets and Grammy after-parties. Her first secret entanglement began in February 1996, during a scheduled visit to Dr. Kevin Lawrence, a well-known plastic surgeon on Wilshire Boulevard. Officially, LaFace Records labeled the appointment as a simple refinement consultation. The meeting took half an hour. The relationship lasted almost 8 months. Nurses later whispered that Toni returned to his office at 11:40 p.m. on February 17th, slipping through the back service entrance in a wide-brimmed hat. A week later, staff at a private Palm Springs villa claimed they saw Toni and Lawrence having dinner poolside under a false reservation name, Miss Carter. But Toni Set's fascination didn't end with surgeons. In May 1997, at a celebrity boxing charity event hosted by Eddie Murphy, Toni crossed paths with Marcus Steele, a semi-pro wrestler with a jaw shaped by injuries and a physique built from hardship rather than celebrity gym trainers. Within a few weeks, Marcus was spotted sneaking onto Toni's tour bus during the Secrets tour. Crew members swore he hid behind wardrobe crates as the bus pulled out of Phoenix at 12:22 a.m. on June 3rd. He was said to have remained on board until slipping out unnoticed at an abandoned rest stop outside Tucson. Later in San Antonio, a security guard confessed to letting Marcus enter through a loading ramp just minutes after Toni finished performing Unbreak My Heart, her dress still damp with stage sweat. Whitney learned these things directly from Babyface and L.A. Reid during a late-night listening session in 1998. Their tone wasn't gossipy, it was worried. Toni wasn't being reckless, she was running. Running from the industry's grip into the arms of men who couldn't use her fame because they never lived inside it. But fleeing came at a price: missed rehearsals, missed flights, and a heart constantly torn between two different realities. Toni didn't choose many lovers. She chose men who didn't belong to her world. And that's what stunned Whitney the most. 6. Mary J. Blige. In mid-1990s New York, whispers spread through studios, back alleys, and late-night lounges. What if the men Mary loved were more dangerous than the demons she sang about? At a time when her voice was healing millions, her private world was leading her into circles most artists never dared enter, circles ruled not by music, but by fear. Her heartbreak wasn't poetic. It had a trigger, a street reputation, and a name that echoed through Brooklyn blocks. Between 1995 and 1997, insiders claimed Mary gravitated toward men who operated far outside the law, the type who supplied neighborhoods across New York with unregistered weapons and earned loyalty through intimidation. The most infamous was a man known only as Tone Slick, a volatile figure whose anger was as explosive as the streets he dominated. On July 18, 1996, at a rooftop mixtape gathering in the legendary Queensbridge houses, everything spiraled. Witnesses said Mary arrived quietly in a black Lexus at exactly 11:52 p.m., stepping out beside Tone, who wore a hooded jacket despite the suffocating heat. Moments later, a verbal clash escalated when Tone drove his fist into another man's jaw, sending bodies crashing down the stairwell. Neighbors claimed Mary screamed for him to stop as sirens wailed toward Vernon Boulevard. The raid conducted by the NYPD ended the party, but not the rumors, because now she had been seen with one of Brooklyn's most volatile men, and the industry noticed. Security teams at Sony Music flagged the incident first thing the next morning, and the story spread fast. Months later, during a charity gala, rapper Nas pulled Whitney aside. With a grim expression, he said, "Mary's running with men who ain't built for love, only survival." Whitney understood too well. She had seen what it meant to seek protection in dangerous places. Because Mary wasn't merely choosing the wrong lovers, she was choosing men who carried guns, men who solved problems with violence, men whose loyalty could turn lethal in a single heartbeat. Her love life wasn't messy. It was combustible. And in the New York of the 90s, combustible men didn't just break hearts, they created casualties. 7 Faith Evans, the Atlanta flights no one was ever supposed to trace. What if the most dangerous love triangle in Faith's life had nothing to do with Biggie or Tupac, but with a man the public has never heard of, a man she crossed state lines to see? That was the rumor that rattled the halls of Bad Boy Records in the late 90s, whispered by engineers, managers, stylists, and backup vocalists who noticed Faith slipping out of sessions like she lived 2 lives at once. Between 1998 and 1999, a pattern emerged. Faith kept purchasing last-minute tickets to Atlanta, each booked under a different alias: Marie Fisher, Tanya Ellison, G. Wallace. She never brought luggage. She never stayed longer than one night. And according to those who witnessed what shouldn't have been witnessed, the reason was a producer known only as Major King, not a star, not a chart topper, not even signed. But he had something Faith craved, a gritty, smooth sound that felt like velvet over concrete, and a quiet charm that pulled her in like gravity. On September 12, 1998, staff at the Renaissance Atlanta Midtown recalled seeing Faith check in at 10:14 p.m., hidden beneath a low baseball cap. At 10:27, Major King stepped into the lobby. Security cameras captured them entering the elevator separately, then exiting together on the 14th floor. By sunrise, she was gone, back on a flight to Newark, smiling like she had slept 8 peaceful hours and not lived a secret in the dark. But secrets like that don't stay buried. A young assistant engineer, the kind artists forget, is standing in the corner while the room falls apart, later confessed to Kelly Price that Faith recorded a demo in early 1999. In the raw vocal track, she whispered along with a man Sip's voice, "You don't belong to them tonight." Kelly was shaken. During rehearsals for VH1 Divas, she quietly repeated the story to Whitney, her voice low as if even the walls might be listening. And there were more signs. Flight schedules eventually revealed Faith traveled to Atlanta 6 separate times between February and November 1999. Always alone, always discreet, never for more than 24 hours. Every time she returned to the studio, she carried the same glow, the same faintly smudged eyeliner, the same trembling in her hands, like she was holding on to something forbidden, something fragile, something she couldn't let go of. Faith wasn't juggling many lovers. She was risking everything for one man. And Whitney understood instantly, the scandal wasn't the affair. It was the flawless way Faith kept it hidden. 8 Janet Jackson. Have you ever wondered what a superstar does when talent alone stops satisfying her? When she wants to rebuild her emotions, her image, her entire artistic identity from the inside out. For Janet, the answer lived inside a secret 2-year chapter that insiders still whisper about with equal parts awe and disbelief. From 1990 to 1992, Janet didn't date for affection, status, or companionship. She dated for research. Her intimacy became a private laboratory, a place where she studied desire, movement, vulnerability, and reinvention, and the men she selected were as unexpected as the purpose behind them. The first was Stephen Harville, a photographer she met during a shoot for Rolling Stone on January 14, 1990. Crew members later claimed Janet dismissed her entire team unusually early, then invited Stephen to her Malibu home under the excuse of reviewing proofs. A security guard said Stephen left at 3:07 a.m., barefoot, boots dangling from his hand. Months later, Janet attended a performance by the Joffrey Ballet in Chicago, where she locked eyes with Daniel Armit, a principal dancer whose fluidity fascinated her. By February 1991, Daniel had been quietly flown to Los Angeles and placed in Janet's Echo Park guest house for what insiders called movement observation. Neighbors claimed they often saw Janet walking barefoot between the houses each evening, glass of red wine in hand. But the most explosive moment came in July 1992 at the Directors Guild of America Theater on Sunset Boulevard. After a documentary screening, Janet slipped into a black limousine with a rising music video director whose name insiders still refuse to say aloud. The driver, later fired, claimed they didn't reappear for more than 4 hours, returning with smudged eyeliner, rumpled clothes, and an energy no rehearsal could replicate. Each man would later admit, quietly and off the record, that Janet required lifetime non-disclosure agreements forbidding them from ever describing what truly happened. Whitney heard the truth from a stylist who dressed both women, a man who insisted Janet wasn't being reckless. She was studying. Janet didn't sleep with many men. She slept with men who offered new textures, new emotions, new creative sparks. Each encounter became a blueprint for the era she was constructing, and that made this chapter one of her most calculated and most misunderstood. 9. Ashanti. Ashanti. The dancers. The dressing rooms. The summer of 2003. Every R&B diva has a pattern. Mary chose men who carried danger. Toni chose men who carried status. But Ashanti, she was drawn to men who carried movement, dancers whose bodies made arenas scream before she even stepped into the spotlight. During the height of the Murder Inc. era, her weakness wasn't executives or producers, it was the men who lived inside her choreography. And the summer of 2003 became tour folklore. It began in June at Madison Square Garden during the Rock the Mic tour, when Ashanti was spotted slipping into a rehearsal room with Troy Batiste, a dancer known for sculpted abs and a smile that could undress a room. Rehearsal wrapped at 9 p.m. Troy didn't set leave until 11:47. A janitor later admitted he heard laughter, then a long, quiet stretch, then the unmistakable crash of a clothing rack toppling over. But Troy wasn't the only chapter. In July, when the tour moved to Miami, Ashanti grew close to Lamar J., a Jamaican dancer famous for acrobatics on stage and even more impressive rumors off stage. At the American Airlines Arena, a stagehand reported seeing Ashanti pull Lamar into her dressing room during a break. They emerged 30 minutes later, Ashanti glowing, Lamar adjusting his belt with the subtlety of a man who thought no one was watching. Then came Vince McCall, the name Whitney heard most often. At the BET Awards 2003 after-party, Vince was seen following Ashanti into a restricted hallway. Witnesses said his hands slid to her waist as she whispered something directly into his ear. Whatever it was made him grin like he had just won the encore of his life. A BET producer summed it up perfectly. Ashanti doesn't fall for men with power, she falls for men who move. Whitney heard the full story from a choreographer who'd worked both her tours and Ashanti's. He told her, half laughing, "She never touches a man who steps out of rhythm. If he can set dance with her on stage, he sure as hell won set dance with her off it." 10. Brandy. Nothing shatters youth faster than the wrong man, and for Brandy, barely 18, already branded America's perfect teenage sweetheart, the wrong men were almost always the older ones. Between 1997 and 2000, the industry watched quietly as she drifted toward men 10, 12, sometimes 15 years her senior. Men who should have understood the difference between guidance and seduction, but chose not to. Her first entanglement began after the Never Say Never listening party in October 1997, held atop a rooftop in Los Angeles. That night she met DJ Ronnie Vega, a 32-year-old nightlife veteran with a gravelly voice and a long history of dating young singers. Witnesses said Brandy curled next to him on a couch, listening intently as he spoke like a mentor, though the way his hand slid across her thigh suggested something far less noble. By March 1998, Vega Sepp's burgundy Lexus was frequently spotted idling behind Record One studios around 9 p.m., and more than one producer joked she had the oldest boyfriend in R&B. It wasn't instead a joke. It was a warning no one had the courage to speak aloud. Then came April 1999. A Chicago producer, known not for hit records but for his irresistible charm, arranged a fake writing session for Brandy from 7 to 10 p.m. at a dimly lit studio in North Hollywood. No music was created that night. Instead, he lowered the lights, ordered takeout, and spent hours talking to her about emotional depth, holding her hands, telling her she was extraordinary in ways boys her age would never understand. He was nearly 15 years older. The truth finally cracked open during the filming of Double Platinum in November 1999. Between takes, Brandy sat beside Whitney and whispered, "I don't stet want boys my age. They don't stet make me feel safe." Whitney didn't scold her. She recognized the wound instantly, a young woman seeking protection in men who had too much power and too little discipline. Brandy wasn't set involved with many men. She was involved with men who knew exactly how inexperienced she was, men who mistook innocence for opportunity, men who molded her before she ever had a chance to mold herself. And that's why her chapter became one of the quietest and most unsettling in Whitney's hidden list. 11. Keyshia Cole. Some women fall for charm. Keyshia fell for damage. The kind of damage that walks, breathes, and knows precisely how to pull someone else into its darkness. Where Faith Evans hid her affair across state lines, Keyshia hid hers behind men whose pasts were heavier than anything fame could erase. Between 2004 and 2009, insiders whispered that she moved from one fractured man to another, men with criminal records, men carrying emotional trauma like armor, men whose tattoos told stories they couldn't speak out loud, men who needed saving and knew she would always try. One of the earliest murmurs surfaced in July 2005 while she was filming her BET reality series The Way It Is. Crew members noticed a tall, heavily tattooed figure lingering outside her Oakland home each night in a silver Dodge Charger. His name was Darius D. Locke Freeman, a man freshly released from San Quentin State Prison after serving time on a burglary plea. On July 22nd, a camera operator swore he saw Keyshia sneaking D-Locke through the back entrance around 1:30 a.m., despite producers pleading with her to avoid being seen with him. Their relationship burned fast. 3 months of passion, arguments, and fear. Then came Trevor Miles, a former security guard with a fuse as short as his patience. During the Let It Go tour in September 2007, hotel staff at the Charlotte Marriott City Center reported hearing explosive yelling from Keyshia's suite at 3:18 a.m. Moments later, Trevor stormed out shirtless, knuckles bloody, face stiff with rage. Insiders later claimed they shattered a lamp during an argument fueled by jealousy, and Keyshia begged hotel security not to file an incident report. But Trevor wouldn't disappear. He showed up at rehearsals, backstage entrances, parking lots, hovering at the edge of her life like unfinished business. The most complicated chapter arrived in 2010, when Keishia started seeing a divorced father named Anthony Reed, charming, jobless, emotionally unstable. A stylist who dressed both Whitney and Keishia pulled Whitney aside during a BET event, sighing, "Keishia loves project men. If he sits broken, she sits try to fix him." It wasn't set judgment. It was fear for her heart. Keishia didn't sit sleep with many men. She slept with men who were shattered, men who saw her empathy as a lifeline, men who took far more than they ever gave, and every time one left, it carved a new room inside her loneliness, a feeling Whitney recognized instantly. 12. Beyoncé. Beyoncé's story doesn't begin with fame or perfection. It begins with Houston, long before Destiny's Child, before MTV cameras, before the world polished her into an icon. People like to believe she never had a messy past. The truth is simply this: her team buried it before the spotlight ever arrived. Between 1996 and 1998, a teenage Beyoncé quietly dated several boys within Houston's private dance and underground music circles. Relationships erased the moment she became Beyoncé. The first whispered name was Lauren Simmons, a dancer at the Hip Hop Dance Academy. On April 11, 1996, after rehearsal, Beyoncé was seen sharing a quick kiss with Lauren behind the studio dumpster. She believed no one noticed, except a 14-year-old classmate who repeated the story years later. Months passed. Then, in January 1997, she began seeing a local rapper called Lil Dre, whose mixtapes drifted through neighborhoods along Cullen Boulevard. The two were spotted holding hands at a late-night Whataburger drive-thru around 1 a.m. Her father, Matthew Knowles, shut the relationship down almost immediately. But insiders insist the real connection was with Marcus Hill, a high school basketball player from Yates High School. Beyoncé was seen with him 3 separate times between April and July 1998, including a late-night moment where she climbed into his car outside a Blockbuster Video at 11:52 p.m. A friend of Marcus later claimed they spent more than an hour together in the back seat, convinced no one recognized them. Whitney learned these stories through Texas producers who'd watched Beyoncé's earliest showcases. They said her team erased everything, every teenage crush, every boy she touched, every night that didn't fit the legend they were building. 13. Kelly Rowland. If Ashanti's lovers danced inside her spotlight, Kelly Rowland's moved across continents. She wasn't drawn to street men or industry men. She was drawn to foreign men, men whose accents shifted the rhythm of her heartbeat, men who carried the world in their voices. Between 2001 and 2004, as Destiny's Child toured internationally, Kelly quietly earned a reputation for leaving every continent with one more lover than she arrived with. The first whisper surfaced in February 2001 in Milan during the Survivor promotional tour. At a glittering after-party hosted by Dolce & Gabbana, Kelly met an Italian entrepreneur named Riccardo Marino. Witnesses claimed he kissed her hand within 5 minutes of meeting her. 2 hours later, Kelly slipped out a side exit. Riccardo followed. Hotel staff said he didn't check out until 11 a.m. the next morning. 3 months later in Berlin, Kelly was seen having a private dinner with Jonas Klein, a German model with jawlines sharp enough to make photographers gasp. A paparazzo captured Kelly entering the Ritz-Carlton Berlin at exactly 12:03 a.m. Jonas arrived 44 seconds later, slipping in through a staff elevator. But Brazil, that was the chapter everyone whispered about the loudest. In October 2003, during a Dangerously in Love tour stop in Rio de Janeiro, Kelly reportedly fell into a whirlwind romance with Marco Valente, a semi-pro footballer with sunburned shoulders and a smile that seemed to stay on her skin long after he left the room. On October 18th, after a wild beachfront party in Copacabana, Witnesses swore they saw Kelly and Marco sprint fully dressed into the ocean, laughing like teenagers. They didn't set return for nearly 20 minutes. Whitney heard about Kelly Sepp's pattern from a European stylist who had toured with both Destiny Sepp's child and Whitney Sepp's own dancers. The stylist said, "Kelly doesn't choose men, she chooses countries. Every country gives her a new version of herself. Kelly wasn't sleeping with men at random. She was choosing men who represented the world she never had in Houston, men who sounded different, felt different, and offered a kind of escape no American stage could. Her lovers weren't set trophies, they were postcards." 14. Fantasia. Fantasia Barrino's story didn't mirror the others. Her danger wasn't armed men, backup dancers, or international temptation. Her downfall came wrapped in wedding rings, married men, most of them from the same southern communities she trusted. Between 2006 and 2009, Fantasia fell into a painful cycle. She kept choosing men who already had homes, wives, and responsibilities that could never include her, and each choice pulled her deeper into emotional fire. The first whisper spread through Charlotte in August 2006. Fantasia had begun spending late nights with David Hartman, a married youth pastor who lived just 2 blocks from her aunt. Neighbors claimed Fantasia's Cadillac Escalade was parked outside his house long after midnight. On August 29th, a woman walking her dog swore she saw Fantasia step out at 2 a.m., hoodie up, sunglasses on, trying not to be seen. Then came March 2008. Fantasia started seeing Shane Calloway, a married HVAC technician from Colombia. They met backstage after a show when he repaired an overheating AC unit. According to a lighting tech, Fantasia invited Shane to her home in Greensboro on March 17th. He stayed until sunrise. But the relationship that truly shook her world and Whitney's was Antoine Cook, the married cell phone salesman, whose affair with Fantasia erupted publicly in 2009. Court filings later revealed that Antoine's wife discovered hotel receipts from August 16th at the Ritz-Carlton Charlotte, where Fantasia and Antoine spent the night under the alias T. Jackson. The scandal nearly destroyed her, leading to Fantasia's emotional collapse in late 2010. Whitney heard about all 3 men through church circles, promoters, and a concerned North Carolina pastor who begged her to speak to Fantasia before everything spiraled further. Whitney understood the wound too well, loving men who could never love you back fully. 15. Aaliyah's chapter was the one Whitney carried most heavily, not because it was wild or reckless, but because it was heartbreakingly quiet. Her danger never came from rappers, street kings, or fame-chasing musicians. It came from the men who stood behind cameras lighting rigs and call sheets, men older, steadier, and mesmerized by her softness. Between 1999 and 2001, while filming Romeo Must Die and Queen of the Damned, Aaliyah became entangled with at least 4 crew members, men who watched her not from the stage, but from the shadows. The first was a stunt coordinator named Ryan Kent, hired for the action sequences on Romeo Must Die. On October 3, 1999, crew members whispered that Aaliyah spent nearly 2 hours inside Ryan's trailer during lunch break, stepping out afterward with tousled hair and a shy, almost embarrassed smile. Then came Marco Tilden, a lighting technician whose job was to sculpt her in perfect glow. On January 12, 2000, Marco was seen adjusting her costume straps far longer than needed. A wardrobe assistant later swore she watched Aaliyah slip a folded number into Marco's back pocket as she walked away. During the filming of Queen of the Damned, things intensified. A second unit director, a man whose name insiders still refuse to speak, was rumored to have spent an entire night with Aaliyah in his Melbourne hotel room on June 21, 2001, after a rap party at the Crown Casino. A hotel attendant claimed Aaliyah left at 5:43 a.m., still wearing the sequin skirt from the night before. The last man was Chris Daly, a dancer from her Try Again video. Their chemistry was undeniable, even if the world never saw it. One backup dancer told Whitney, quietly, "Aaliyah didn't chase stars. She chose the men who made her feel normal." In the end, these stories weren't shared to shame anyone. They were shared because Whitney understood them. These 15 women weren't reckless. They were human, surviving an industry that demanded perfection while offering loneliness and secrets no spotlight could hide. Now it's your turn. Which story shocked you the most? And which diva should we explore deeper in the next video? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. If you want more hidden files, untold histories, and truths the industry never wanted revealed, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More powerful stories are coming next.